And I'd like to welcome everyone to our first leadership webinar for part of our Masters of Science in Leadership Summer School series that we're happy to offer this summer. And thank you all for joining us. We have current students and potential students joining us, some BC alumni and staff, and friends of the Woods College joining us. I'm Mary Ellen Joyce. I'm the program director. I'm also a former retiree who came back to return to my alma mater to lead the MS in leadership. And so we're doing the webinar series to provoke thinking about a variety of topics and engage in conversations about timeless leadership principles that are embedded in Ignatian values. Today's webinar will be on Ignatian leadership, the leaders we need now. In June, the third Friday of June, we'll be doing a webinar on fostering dignity and belonging. The third Friday of July, we'll be doing spirit in the workplace with an intentional question mark there. And then in August, we will do our last webinar on communicating to connect. So what I found fascinating was last summer, we did a meta-analysis of recent proposed models of new leadership that have been developed and proposed by firms like McKinsey and Deloitte and Boston Consulting, some executive search firms like Korn Ferry and Spencer Stewart. And these are some of the attributes that all of them say are needed for leaders in today's environment. And you'll see leading from the heart to inspire and enrich human experience, leading with respect and compassion, leading with purpose to achieve a greater common good, leading with courage and vision to create conditions for flourishing. And as I compared all of the different models with each other, what was particularly of note was these new models aren't as new as folks might claim. They're actually 500 years old. Because if you look at what Ignatian leadership is all about, it is about caring for and respecting others, dedication to promoting human dignity, a focus on magis, which is attention to being more and doing more for others, to be men and women for others, focusing on flourishing and well-being, to be contemplators in action, focused on the development of self-awareness and reflection, and discernment to encourage leaders to employ critical and integrative thinking to solve complex problems. And lastly, on serving a higher purpose. All of these characteristics are showing up in these new models of leadership. So this is exactly how we designed our new curriculum for the MS leadership. And you'll see here just by the names of our core courses: Daring to Lead, Articulating Your Vision and Values, Self-Aware Leader, Problem Solving Through Critical Thinking, Leading Change from the Middle, and Women and Men for Others. So those are the core courses of our revised Masters in Leadership. And in essence, we like to think of it as developing the leaders the world needs now. Now, today, to start off our summer school, is one of our faculty members who's also a dear friend, Captain Gregory Noon, Dr. Noon, who's retired after a 30-year career in the U.S. Navy. He has been teaching our course at BC on Ignatian-based ethics. Moving into the new program, he'll be teaching our foundational course, Daring to Lead. He's on the faculty at West Virginia University. He's a consultant for the U.S. Institute of Peace, whereby he won an award for his work in Afghanistan. He's director and senior peace fellow at the Public International Law and Policy Group. And as I said, a 30-year career in the Navy. So Greg is going to be talking about the elements of Ignatian leadership. And so it's just a real pleasure to welcome you all and to turn the webinar over to my friend and colleague, Greg Noon.
Great. Thank you, Mary Ellen. It's a pleasure to be here. And thank you for that generous introduction. And welcome to all of you who are joining us today for this inaugural kickoff of our summer school series. We appreciate it. I put in the chat, what does leadership mean to each of you? And you can reply to that either in the Q&A, where you're able to put any questions during the conversation here, or you can put it in the chat. I believe you can reply to it in the chat because I think I've enabled it for everyone, but if not, reply to it in the Q&A. Mary Ellen, I'm going to share my screen to put up my presentation here. So there we go. And everyone should be able to see that. Mary Ellen gave me a great introduction to exactly what I was going to talk about. In fact, some of the same slides I borrowed from her. Mary Ellen said it was really her that did a deep dive in a literature review of what the high-paying commercial entities and firms are saying about what leadership is and what leadership we need today. And the reality of it is, at the end of each of those, they said 95% of us all agree this is what we need, but only 13% are doing it. So what we all think we know what we need and what we're actually doing is a massive gap between the two. So what we want to talk about today here is just a couple of concepts, and then I'd love to take any questions during this and certainly at any time, and certainly at the end. So a couple ideas. What's leadership? And I put that in quotes because not everyone agrees with what leadership is. And then we're going to talk about some of the things that Mary Ellen just mentioned, the leadership, knowledge, skills, and abilities, the KSAs. And then we're going to meet St. Ignatius of Loyola and talk about the leadership values that come from St. Ignatius. And Mary Ellen touched on some of them. And then the 4 pillars of Ignatian leadership, and then finally kind of that everyday Ignatian leadership that I think we can all benefit from. So the ideas of what, and I apologize, I did not mean to make my slides all builds. So I'm going to tap all of them and bring them out. I'll have to go back and fix that PowerPoint show. There's nothing worse than the build slides. So what is leadership? And I could put 50 slides on here, and everyone has their favorite leadership quotes on what we think is leadership and what we actually have seen in our own lives. So whether or not you like John Quincy Adams, I wanted to give it a little bit of a local feel. If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you're a leader. I think that's fair. The U.S. Army defines leadership as providing purpose, direction, and motivation to accomplish the mission and improve the organization. And of course, President Harry S. Truman, which was famously referred to in any leadership conversation when he talks about the buck stops here, he called leadership the art of persuading people to do what they should have done in the first place. So there's a lot of different ways that you can view leadership. You can view it as in your personal capacity, in your personal experience, certainly. My kids, when they were little, there's one particular coach that was really not the best, not the best coach to be around kids of that age. But I told my kids, every athletic coach you ever had is really a metaphor for every boss you're going to have. You're going to have some bosses that yell at you, and other bosses that cheer you, other bosses that lead from the front, and other bosses that really don't know what they're doing, and they just expect you to figure it out. And that's kind of how, for those of us who played a lot of sports growing up, that kind of describes all of the coaches that we had. So to somebody put in the Q&A, I guess the chat is disabled, so I apologize for that. I thought I fixed that. So leadership to me is about action, not a position. So fair enough, right? The concept that the difference between positional leadership and personal leadership. Positional leadership, as we all know, is that concept that we have a somebody in charge. They're in the boss's chair, therefore they're the boss. Therefore, what they say goes. Okay, the level of respect or admiration or commitment that people have to that boss probably varies. Where personal leadership comes from within, it's how people behave. And really, we're going to talk more about that because that's really where Ignatian comes from in all this. I think short of having a wide-ranging discussion, we can kind of look at the, whoops, hold on a second. We can kind of look at these ideas of leadership, right? So we all agree that personally, all excellent leaders need self-understanding, integrity, authenticity, and courage. Fair enough. And interpersonally, they must employ excellent communication, motivation, inspiration, and empathy. And then finally, organizationally, they need to be strategic, visionary, purposeful, and mission driven. I think that's a pretty generic understanding of what we would expect from leaders and leadership positions. But let's look at some of the things that that I think we can learn from Ignatius, and we'll go into these in a little bit more understanding of where they come from. But the concept of Ignatian leadership is really simple and yet, I think, really an epiphany. We all lead all the time. So whether we're doing it well or whether we're doing it poorly, we all lead all the time. And often in small, unintended ways, 15 seconds at a time. This, I think, is one of my favorite things about Ignatian leadership. It's not the big speech at the shareholder meeting. It's not the big speech rallying the team before the championship game, or the big speech motivating the men before they cross the line in a time of conflict. It's really, leadership is 15 seconds at a time. How do you treat the barista at your Starbucks? How do you treat the janitor in your building that empties your trash can each day? Do you know their names? Do you know that the security guard who's at the front desk every morning and every time you go out for lunch and every time you come back and when you leave for the day? Do you know his name? All these casual encounters are opportunities to convey respect, or not. We've all seen it while standing in line at Starbucks. And people will view others based on these brief encounters rather than by the big speech that a leader gave. You know, it's interesting. One of the biggest speeches that we all know Winston Churchill for is when he talks about, you know, fighting them on the beaches, fighting them on the landing grounds, fighting them on the fields, and, you know, we'll never surrender. That speech barely registered to the English people because they were doing polling throughout the war, and that speech barely made a blip. Today, it's seen as one of the great motivating speeches of all time, delivered on radio by this interesting character in Winston Churchill. But the reality of it is that it barely moved the needle. But another concept here is leadership being a personal choice. Everyone has leadership potential, and true leaders unlock that potential in others. In other words, this goes straight to the debate of, are there born leaders or are leaders made? And there's a pretty heavy school of thought that either you're a leader or you're not. You're born, and obviously not born. I don't see too many day-old babies, you know, leading a charge. But through your nature and nurture, you grow up to be a man or a woman that is a leader, or you're not. But the reality of it is that everybody has the potential, and our job as leaders is to unlock that potential. Lead yourself and others by example. I've held command 3 times in the United States Navy, and this was an important piece. There's a lot of things we do in the military that we expect others to do, and we need to make sure that we're doing everything that we expect them to do. If you're going to hold people accountable for whatever it is, in the military, we're fairly big on being on time. If you're going to hold people accountable for being on time, well, then you need to be on time. Simple things like that, yet there's far too much do as I say and not as I do type of leadership. Develop the best and the brightest talent. And I love this line: true leaders create leaders, not followers. So how are you positioning the next generation of leadership? one of the worst things that I saw in the military was when a leader would, what we refer to as skim the cream. So there was a great opportunity to go on some mission or some trip or some training, and the leader would designate himself as the person that needed to go on that trip, on that training. And I always found that disheartening. And I was in a fairly senior position, but I know how it looks to junior personnel, and I can only imagine what they were saying behind his back, because he was skimming the cream off the top. Whereas a true leader takes these opportunities and lines up his subordinates and make sure that they get these opportunities to do the next big thing, and motivates them to accomplish the mission. And then lastly, as I was just saying, find ways for subordinates to be personally self-motivated. Give them the opportunities. Let them show you what they can do, and reward them with a kind word or a small benefit. In the case of the military, you could give them a letter of commendation, or maybe even a medal because of the work that they had been doing. So find ways to have them motivate themselves. There's a lot of jobs that don't pay a lot when you're the person at the bottom of the food chain. But if they know that you're personally invested in them, and that they feel like they're part of your team and not just somebody who works for you, then that's going to have a massive difference on their motivation, regardless of how poorly they may be paid. And lastly, support and trust the leaders you lead, especially those on the ground. I've spent a lot of time in government, a lot of time in the military, a lot of time in hazardous locations. And I've been the guy at the flagpole, as it were, at the Pentagon. And I've also been the guy out in the field reporting back to the flagpole. And there's a common feeling that the guys back at HQ don't understand what's going on here on the ground. And at HQ, there's an idea that the guys out on the ground, they don't see the big picture. They just see what's in front of them. So you really have to take a leap of faith, but support and trust the leaders you lead, and especially the ones who are a lot closer to it than you sitting back in your air-conditioned office in Washington, D.C. Okay, so Mary Ellen just mentioned the leadership research that she undertook, and it was really quite remarkable. As she mentioned, all the leading management consulting firms, search companies, and they all concluded the same thing, that we need a new model of leadership to meet the current emerging challenge organizations face worldwide. And all those firms produced the desired KSAs that she touched upon. And so let's look at some of those. Mary Ellen had put them up, so I won't belabor them. But on the first screen here, leading from the heart and inspiring, enriching the human experience, being inclusive to reach across national and cultural differences, respecting compassion to foster a sense of belonging, lead with a purpose to achieve a greater common good, have the courage and boldness and vision to create conditions of thriving, do it with integrity and make ethical decisions, and lead with emotional and social intelligence to achieve common goals. Some of us aren't as good at emotional and social intelligence as others. Some have an EQ that's off the charts. Sometimes those people are weaker in other areas, but their ability to understand others and their ability to relate to others and talk and speak with others is really a gift. So what are you? Are you someone that has an emotional intelligence? Do you read the room really well? Or are you somebody that is one of the smartest people that we know, or maybe sometimes you're the smartest person you know? And can you figure out how to do both? I never thought I was the smartest person in any boardroom that I was in, but I was willing to listen. I was willing to learn. But what I did understand is the interaction between people, and the fact that if you do it with respect, then you're going to get much more out of it. Your grandmother probably told you the same thing my grandmother said. You get more with honey than you do vinegar. And so leading with respect is a large component of what these firms have decided we need. Then just to round out this list here, So leading with empathy and compassion. Um, Sometimes empathy is the wrong word, right? Maybe we haven't gone through what they've gone through, so it looks more like sympathy. But nonetheless, it's a compassion of the leader that can make a difference. Um, have the confidence to hold everybody accountable. Have an optimistic view of human nature and put humans at the center of everything we do. This is more important now than ever, right? With AI and all these other things that we're producing and running headlong into. Having a deep understanding of self and committed to learning and growth, collaboratively creating trusting, robust teams, and leading with critical, integrative, and strategic thinking to solve complex problems. I think creating a team is probably the most important thing you can do. And if you can create a team that would walk through fire for one another, you'll get much further. So where does this take us? Well, it starts with this Inigo Lopez de Loyola. He was born in Basque Country of Spain in 1491, and later his name was changed to Ignatius, and he became, of course, Saint Ignatius. The Loyola family were minor nobility, which means that they were they weren't struggling. They had service and opportunities that they could undertake. They weren't stuck on a field tending crops. Ignatius was devoted to swordsmanship, seeking battlefield glory, and catching the eye of noble women. But really, his education was lacking, and he really couldn't read or write. In May of 1521, Saint Ignatius became a not only a combat veteran, but he became a disabled veteran. A cannonball shattered his right leg and wounded his left while fighting at Pamplona against the French. Interestingly enough, Saint Ignatius also underwent what would only be termed as kind of reconstructive surgery for his right leg in order to try to get this protruding bone that was sticking out of his leg. I can only imagine what that type of surgery looked like in the 1500s, and probably lacking anything resembled anesthesia, and certainly probably lacking anything that resembled a surgeon. So his decade-long conversion began during this long recuperation when he started reading more and more about Christ and about the saints, and it drove him to change the direction he was going in. So he did a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and then he decided to seek his education. He literally went back to school with young boys so he could learn to read and write in Spain. And this eventually led him to Paris. And this is where he met and he formed his team. And after years of developing this team, this Society of Jesus, they finally received formal recognition by Pope Paul III in 1540. So St. Ignatius and the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits, what they decided to do was work harder than anybody. And one of the ways they wanted to do it was through education. So today, and when you look at religious orders involved in education, there are more Jesuit institutions in that field than anything else, because the Jesuits went and opened schools at a rapid pace around the world. The Jesuits also were willing to leave home, leave Europe, and they traveled to the Far East and to other places in order to spread their word and to spread their beliefs. Some of the values that they share, some of the values that Mary Ellen touched on at the beginning of this conversation. Um, the idea of caring for others and demonstrating kindness, and to give to self and to others love. The Magus, to do more, to create more just and humane world, and be an agent of change, and be open to new challenges. And so these are some critical points for the Jesuits and how they believe. And then, of course, the glory to God, focus on serving a higher purpose and serving something greater than yourself. Um, Mary Ellen mentioned she worked for John McCain many years ago. My wife also worked for John McCain in his 2000 presidential campaign. And that was one of the things that I'll never forget. John McCain, who had spent his career in the United States Navy as a pilot. He was shot down over Vietnam. He spent 5.5 years as a prisoner of war, literally being tortured on a daily basis. And they were torturing him for one thing and one thing only. All he had to do was agree to go home. If he went home, the torture would stop, and they would let him go home to his family, to his wife and his kids. But because they were going to use that for the propaganda value of sending someone of his significance home. And McCain stuck to his beliefs that the first in were the first out. And so he stayed for 5.5 years, being tortured every day. And during his political campaign, he would say, we need to serve something greater than ourselves. And we need to make sure that people have that opportunity in their lifetime. And this is something that the Jesuits believed in. Women and men for others. So working through that purposeful life and that service to others. And then be contemplative, developing a self-awareness, continue to commit to learning and to growth, and get into this habit of reflection. This is one of the biggest aspects of what St. Ignatian and the Jesuits talked about, is this idea of reflection. And I think if you think about it, you probably might do more reflection than over the last couple of years, I've had plenty of athletes on in this class, athletes from the football team, from the women's lacrosse team, et cetera. And when I asked one of them about whether or not they engage in reflection, he thought for a moment, and then he said, actually, we do. We watch a lot of film. We watch a lot of ourselves, and it's not always and it's very rarely is it the great catch or the touchdown. It's the minor mistake that one of the 11 made, which blew up the play, which allowed the play to be diagnosed and stopped in its tracks by the opposing team. So however you do reflection, I do a lot of public speaking, and oftentimes after I present with the media on the way home, I think of I could have said this differently, or maybe I should have said that. In fact, I do a radio interview right after this is over for NPR in Cleveland, and I already know that when that interview is over, I'll start thinking about what I could have done differently, how I could have expressed myself better in order to make more sense. So, and then of course, the reflection on how we treat each other and how we treat others is critical. Finding God in all things calls upon leaders to be stewards of creation and responsible for the world in which we live in. There's a lot of conversation right now about which way the climate is going, and I think it doesn't take a lot of scientific knowledge to know that we're harming the planet that God gave us, and we're responsible for this, and we're responsible for our children and our children's children. This was something that was given to us, and it's our task to take care of it. And the Jesuits have always believed in that. And then, of course, the discernment, encouraging leaders to employ critical and integrative thinking to solve complex problems. So let's look very briefly at the tool that they use to analyze things before we get into a little bit more into the pillars of the leadership. And this is the IPP, or the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm. And there are 5 components of this: context, experience, reflection again, then taking action, and then going back and evaluating again. So really, why am I doing what I'm doing? And to put it in a simpler phrase, kind of in this framework for decision making, what's the issue? What are the facts? What are the pros and cons? And then re-examine your thinking for bias. Have you come into this already believing that this is going to happen if you do that? So what's the context? What does your experience teach you? Pause and reflect, then take action, and then evaluate again. So the IPP is something that you'll see a lot in the Ignatian leadership literature. Um, and really, and here's the thing: there's no real like theory of Ignatian leadership. Um, it's not written down in this nice, neat package. What I'm going to put up next, though, is the closest that I can come, and this is compliments of Christopher Lowney, who wrote Heroic Leadership, and he calls them the four pillars of Ignatian leadership. I'm not sure that everyone else calls them the four pillars of Ignatian leadership, but I think they're very useful. First and foremost, self-awareness, ingenuity, love, and heroism. So let's look at self-awareness. So this concept of cultivating the habit of, I said it twice, it's so important, obviously a typo, of continuous self-reflection and learning, understanding your strengths and weaknesses and your values in what your worldview is. You must do this initially and daily. And the way the Jesuits would do it would be a 30-day exercise where they would really truly examine themselves and understand what they wanted to do for the world, and then re-examine that on a constant daily basis. Some people write journals, which I think is very useful. I myself wish I wrote more in a journal, but I know others who do, and it's extraordinarily useful for them to continually reflect upon and understand where you are each day. Then, of course, learn from your mistakes to be a better, wiser leader. This is something that we all learn in kindergarten, but believe it or not, very few people practice. They just kind of make the same mistakes over and over again. And sometimes they believe they can do that simply because they're the smartest person or they're the most powerful person. But the problems with that is, as you can imagine, is the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And again, assess your daily impact. Now let's look at what Ignatian leadership tells us with respect to ingenuity. Confidently innovating and adapting to embrace the changing world. Uncover ways to turn human potential into achievement and that vision into a reality. This is one of my favorites. Live with one foot raised. Be always ready to adapt and respond to emerging opportunities. This is something that I learned through these concepts of Ignatian leadership. And I was kind of pleased with myself that I kind of feel like I've lived that way. I actually don't believe in luck. I've always said that instead of luck, it's being prepared to take advantage of the opportunity when it presents itself. And I've always lived that way. But you also have to make yourself ready and available, and raise your hand when it's time to raise your hand for that opportunity. And then practice indifference. And indifference, this takes a little bit of thought here. It's not indifference like we think of it. He's indifferent to that. It's indifference to attachments and to certain certain views that we may have. So it allows us the freedom and disposition to be open and unencumbered, and therefore able to welcome whatever comes, whatever new ideas, cultures, places, and opportunities. Love. Engaging others with a positive, loving attitude. Last year, in his first year as head coach of the Boston Celtics, and I'm hoping there's at least a few Boston Celtics fans on this session. And if you're not a Boston Celtic fan, well, I don't know what to tell you. But Joe Mazzulla is an interesting individual, and I think he's very misunderstood in many ways. And I say that having known Joe for many years. And in his first year of coaching, Jaylen Brown missed 2 free throws that would have won the game with 1 second left or no time on the clock. It was a regular season game. And afterwards, the media and they're required to do all the media interviews. And they said to Coach Mazzulla, they said, what did you tell Jaylen? what did you tell Jalen after you missed those free throws and you lost the game? Implying that Jalen Brown lost the game, ignoring the other 48 minutes and just implying that he lost the game. And Joe, without missing a beat, said, I told him that I loved him. And you just saw the press just stop. And they didn't know how to take that. They didn't know how to understand that. My wife and I chuckled and said, that's classic Joe. And if you read about the Celtics and if you follow the Celtics, look at what the players say about Joe Mazzulla, not about what the prognosticators, not about what the guys who are yelling over the radio and the call-in shows. Look at what the players are saying. And this really goes to people perform best when they're respected, valued, and trusted by someone who generally cares for their well-being. Now, granted, it's a great roster. It's a great team. Brad Stevens has done a great job, but that's where Joe Mazzulla fits into those young men's lives. And at the end of the day, they're young men playing a game and getting paid ridiculous money. But watch how they talk about him as a leader, as a coach. Love-driven leaders seek out and honor the potential self and others, and each person is uniquely endowed with talent and dignity. And if you share that positive attitude and you share that love, I can guarantee you, just like your grandmother said, you get more with honey. And then lastly, heroism. And this doesn't necessarily mean heroism like, running into the machine gun or jumping onto the grenade, but just this concept of energizing yourself and others to just more to the magus, right? The heroic ambitions, and they shape the future rather than passively endure whatever unfolds. We've all had leaders like this, leaders who tried to shape the future and leaders who just sat in their office and just reacted to whatever came along. Not waiting for the big moment, but instead grasp opportunities within reach. And lastly, committing to a way, focusing on goals greater than oneself. So what is it in summary? This is what you can get from this type of leadership. Consistently display ethical behaviors and lead with integrity, critically engage in self-reflection to foster a deep awareness of self, embrace and lead change in organizations and society as a whole, demonstrate critical strategic and systems thinking to solve and challenge complex problems, collaborate with others and lead teams to achieve shared goals, seek continuous improvement and delivery of meaningful results, challenge the established status quo in a quest for justice and equality, and care deeply, deeply for others who strive to create just organizations. I'd love to tell you that I just wanted that extra emphasis on deeply. Again, I missed that. That should have only been one deeply. All right, let me take down the screen share and let's look and see if we have any comments or questions with the time that we have. And I'll be more than happy to discuss anything at all. And if you don't have any questions or comments, that's okay as well. But hopefully this very short conversation gave you a little bit more of an insight into Ignatian leadership and gave you a few things to think about. When I was training young trial lawyers, I would tell them that every lawyer you meet, you should be able to steal one good thing. You don't have to, you're not going to be able to be that guy. I used to go against a guy from Tennessee who would, he'd be talking to the jury and he'd say things like, my granddaddy sitting on his porch smoking his corncob pipe would say, son, you can't milk a raccoon. I have no idea what that means. The visual image of something. But as a kid from Brockton, Massachusetts, I was never going to do that in court. But there are other things that I could steal, that I could learn from and evaluate whether or not what I was doing was sufficient enough and continue to reflect upon how I was carrying myself in the courtroom. So whatever your profession, whatever it is that you do, there's that opportunity to reflect upon, are we doing it? We're doing it well. Are we doing it with love? Are we making sure that we understand and we're being creative enough to try to get to the next level? And then are we being heroic, or are we simply sitting back and waiting for it to all happen? All right. Thoughts, comments, questions?
Do we have any questions coming in? I can't get my video back on, Anna, so.
Yeah, that's okay. And just a reminder that the chat is currently disabled. So if you do have a comment or question, you can either raise your hand and I can allow you to speak in Zoom jargon, or you can also put it in the Q&A.
I think the bottom line is that the my soothing voice has put them all to sleep.
Yeah.
All right, there's a question in the chat. Sheila Rogers, I just have a comment. I found this presentation very helpful and for me as I'm contemplating master's program. Personally, I'm not sure that I want to be a leader, but you position it nicely that leader can mean different things and we all can lead every day, even when we aren't realizing it. Yeah, Sheila, that's exactly right. We all lead all the time, whether it's we're dealing with our kids or whether we're dealing with the mailman or our neighbor. I mean, it's our opportunity to shape how people, to shape people's attitudes and how they view themselves, how they view you, how they view their job. Taking a few minutes to ask people whose names others usually don't know, to ask them about their families and understand where they're from is extraordinarily meaningful and helpful to that person. You may be the second lowest person in the organization, but reaching down and having that conversation with the quote unquote lowest person in the organization is something that's going to mean quite a bit to that individual. I can guarantee it.
Well,
Other
Greg,
thoughts? Go ahead, Mary Ellen.
I was just going to say, I wanted to thank you for really walking us through all the different components, the KSAs, if you will, of leadership. It's so fundamentally different than it was when I was coming up in organizational life. And it's an opportunity for each and every one of us to have an impact in positive ways in every encounter in which we're engaged and in all aspects of our life. And so if we don't have additional comments or questions, I want to respect our time frame for this afternoon. We said we'd go from 12:15 to 1. We're now at that bewitching hour. So if we don't have, just waiting for, see if hand raised before we close out. But I want to thank you, Dr. Captain Noon, for your time here this afternoon. And want to thank you for your teaching at Woods and in our Masters in Leadership. And if any of you have any questions, either for Greg or for me or for Anna, who's, as I said, our Assistant Director for Enrollments, I can be reached at maryellen.joyce@bc.edu. So feel free to shoot me a line, shoot me a note if you want to learn more about the program, have any additional questions. Whoops. Oh, thank you, Anna. She's throwing in on chat my email address. So I hope you all have a lovely long weekend that's coming up. Want to take a note to thank somebody who served for 30 years for your service. Even though it's not Veterans Day, it's Memorial Day, and we are so appreciative for everyone who has put their lives on the line to protect and defend our nation. And I hope to see you all in class in the fall semester. Greg, thank you. Anna, thank you.
Thank you. And just to mention, I'll follow up with a recording of this webinar. So if anybody is interested in going back and viewing what was said, you'll have a copy of that.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you, Greg. Thank you
Have
all.
a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.